house that watches. There's a certain kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels alert, like something is listening, like something is waiting in the heart of Windermere County, buried beneath generations of whispered warnings and burned out folklore. Sits a house that was never built. No blueprints, no records, no foundation anyone can trace. It's just there. It always has been. Locals avoid it. Outsiders never find it. And those who do, I never forget it. The ones who go inside, well, they're not the ones telling the stories. This isn't about creaky floors and cold spots. It isn't about spirits or echoes or haunted dreams. This is about a house that watches. It watches with intent. It watches with memory. It watches with hunger. And now, it's watching you. Welcome to Dark Knight Chronicles TV. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and prepare to uncover the shadows. Let's open the first chapter. The birth of something wrong. It started in 1876. That's the year Windermere stopped sleeping. Ellison Crane, a government land surveyor, was sent deep into the forest to chart a parcel of land that had supposedly gone unclaimed since the county's founding. His team stayed behind in town. He left with a compass, a mule, and a journal. 3 days later, the mule returned alone. They found Crane's camp miles from where it should have been. His tent was shredded like paper, his food untouched, his rifle still loaded. They followed the trail deeper. At the edge of a clearing, they stopped. Something in the air changed there. Sound bent, wine stalled, and in the center stood a house, 3 stories tall, withered, wooden, leaning. A narrow tower jutted up like a bone. Every window faced inward. They assumed someone had built it years ago and forgotten to register the property. But it didn't look old in the normal way. It looked tired, like something pretending to be a house. Like it had once been a thing that lived, and now was trying to hold itself together long enough to be looked at. They searched for Crane, never found him. All they recovered was his journal. The final page read the tree stepped aside to let it through. It doesn't want the land. It wants me to see it. Nobody touched the house. Not that day. Not for years. But it was watching. And people began to feel it. Dogs would stop at the tree line and whimper. Birds flew in jagged circles overhead. Hunters spoke of losing time when they passed near the clearing. Watches slowed. Compass needles spun. Children in Windermere drew pictures of the house before anyone had told them about it. It entered dreams like a parasite. It bled into folklore like mold in old bread. And while everyone tried to forget it existed, it was learning how to be remembered. That was the beginning. The birth of something wrong. Something not made, but manifested. And it was only the first story the house would tell. The Dean family disappearance. In the spring of 1921, a Boston architect named Thomas Dean purchased the property. He claimed it was an undiscovered gem, something he found listed for next to nothing through a lawyer who would later deny ever speaking. To him, the deed was real, stamped and signed, but no one in Windermere remembered selling it. Thomas moved in with his wife Annabel and their 3 children, Marcus, age 10, quiet and clever, Sarah, 8, artistic and strange, and Helen, just 6 months old. They arrived in a black carriage with 2 trunks and smiles wide enough to hide the truth. Locals waved. Annabel waved back. The baby didn't blink. Neighbors said the family was polite but distant. The kids didn't go to school. Groceries were delivered, then left to rot on the porch. Lights flickered in the tower window, even though nobody had ever seen anyone go up there. One man claimed he heard a baby crying in the middle of the night for 12 straight nights. When he knocked to check, the door opened itself, but the crying had stopped. 3 weeks after the family moved in, the mailman rang the bell. No answer. He returned the next day. Still nothing. On the 3rd day, he brought the sheriff. The front door wasn't locked. The house was quiet. Too quiet. There was food on the table. Chairs pulled back. Candles still smoldering. A gramophone was playing, softly, a lullaby that no one recognized. A child's toy clattered across the floor on its own momentum, then stopped at the sheriff's boot. Upstairs in the nursery, the crib was filled with white feathers. The walls were covered in handprints, hundreds of them, all child-sized, all pressed inward. No blood, no struggle, just absence. Annabel's diary sat on the dresser. Her last entry, Sarah says the house has a name. I asked what it was. She whispered it to the window. Then she smiled like she'd never seen us before. The teen family was never found. The state declared the property condemned, but no one removed them. No one boarded the place. No one claimed the house. Because even then, they knew. You don't touch what's watching you. You don't stare into the dark hoping to see something. Because sometimes, it's already looking back. The Watchers and the first sacrifice. It was the fall of 1935 when Elias Barrett came to Windermere. He wasn't a preacher, though he wore a collar. He wasn't a scholar, though he claimed to read languages older than Latin. He was something else entirely, and he came for the house. He called it the Eye of God's shadow. He said it was a place where time folds, where walls forget what they're made of. He said he could hear it breathing from miles away. People ignored him at first. Then came the followers. Barrett gathered a dozen, all draped in black, faces hidden. They called themselves the Watchers. Every Friday at dusk, they would walk the road to the house and kneel before it, not in prayer, in silence, for hours. The first night, the townsfolk mocked them. The second, they watched from their windows. By the 5th, they closed their curtains, because something changed. Crows followed them. Feral dogs howled during the vigils. One child who dared sneak up and spy on the Watchers came home unable to speak. He never spoke. Again. Then came Halloween, 1936. Varric led the Watchers inside. All 12. They lit candles made from wax soaked in something foul-smelling. They carried no tools, no weapons, only pages, torn from a book no one could translate. The next morning, the town was silent. The house was not. Sounds echoed from it, wet, gasping sounds. Windows fogged, The front door pulsed like a heartbeat. Only one of the 12 returned. A woman named Judith Maylorn. She had no eyes, no tongue. Her hands were covered in cuts shaped like spirals. She walked through the town square, barefoot, bleeding, collapsed in front of the church. She died before dawn. On her chest, scratched in with fingernails, were 3 words I deep-linked. First, no bodies were ever recovered. No graves were dug. But from that night forward, the house watched harder. People reported seeing eyes where windows should be. Mirrors fogged even when the air was dry. Every photograph taken near the property developed blurred. No matter how steady the camera, the watchers were gone. But something else had taken their place. The house was no longer dormant. It was feeding. The blueprint that thinks. In 1954, a thunderstorm tore through Windermere. Lightning struck a granary on the outskirts of town, reducing it to smoldering timber and ash among the wreckage. Firefighters found a strange metal canister. Buried beneath scorched grain sacks, it was warm to the touch. Even hours after the fire had died, inside was a scroll dry, unburned, and wrapped in red velvet. It wasn't paper. It wasn't parchment. It was skin. Human skin. Stretched thin, cured like leather, and etched with a blueprint. The drawing wasn't of a house. Not exactly. There were floors and walls, but they curled like intestines. Staircases doubled back on themselves in infinite loops. Rooms led nowhere, or worse, back into themselves. At the center was the tower, and inside the tower, an eye, always the eye. The blueprint was signed. Initials only EC. The scroll was sent to Miskatonic University for analysis. The architectural historian, Professor Adam Reinhardt, reviewed it for 7 days. On the 8th, he hanged himself in his study. His notes were indecipherable. Hundreds of pages filled with spirals, eyes, and words written backward. Only one legible sentence was found. Scroll across the chalkboard in his office. You don't build the house, it builds you. Weeks later, his assistant vanished. She had been last seen staring into a mirrored panel of the blueprint. Her phone was found still, recording. The final footage showed her whispering to something just off camera. It remembers me. After the fire, the scroll was returned to Windermere by order of the university. It was placed in a vault beneath the town records building. But 3 months later, the vault door melted. Not broke, melted. The scroll was gone. In its place, there was a note typed on blank letterhead. It read, "The house already knows its shape." From that day forward, no new buildings in Windermere lasted more than 13 years. Foundations cracked, walls shifted, roofs collapsed without warning. It was as if the land itself was rejecting anything not built by the house, or worse, anything not willing to become it. The college experiment. In the summer of 1978, Dr. Miriam Gray, a psychology professor at Dartmouth, brought 9 graduate students to Windermere for a study. The grant proposal said they'd be researching the effects of isolation on group behavior in historically charged environments. But everyone knew what it really was. They wanted to see the house. Dr. Gray had read the local reports, the disappearances, the watchers, the drawings, the blueprint made of flesh. She wanted to prove that the fear was a contagion. Those legends, repeated long enough, became diseases of the mind. They entered the house on July 3rd. 10 people, 1 week, cameras, audio equipment, journal logs, everything was documented. For the first 2 days, nothing happened. They settled into rooms, cooked simple meals, talked into their recorders. Then on day 3, things shifted. The air turned heavy. The clock stopped. One student, Lee, began waking up at exactly 3:17 a.m. every night, staring at the ceiling with blood running from his ears. Drive.Gray dismissed it as psychosomatic until the scratches appeared. Not on walls, on people. Deep gashes along arms and legs. Always in the shape of spirals. Always in the same spot just above the hip where the appendix should be. One by one, they started hearing it. A sound like breathing through wet cloth. A voice that never spoke in words, only in emotion, shame, rage, hunger. Day 5, one student disappeared from a locked bathroom. All that remained was a mirror fog with a phrase written in reverse. The dreamer opened the door. Day 6, the tower door, which had been locked, stood open. Lee was found sitting at the top of the stairs, eyes closed, mouth open, murmuring, "It's not a place. It's a lesson, Doctor." Gray ended the study. They fled the house at dawn. Only 7 of them made it to the car. 2 were never found. 1 year later, Dr. Gray published a paper called Environmental Contagion and Cognitive Collapse. It was pulled from publication after the peer reviewers claimed the footnotes changed each time they read them. Dr. Gray never returned to academia. She died in 1991 from an aneurysm. Her final words were reportedly whispered into an empty hallway. "The house taught me how to forget myself," and then she was gone, just like the others, just like all of them. Fearcast and Sin. In 2003, during the early days of internet streaming, a ghost hunting channel known as Fearcast decided to go viral. Their plan, a 48-hour live broadcast from inside the house. The team consisted of, for paranormal, vloggers Derek, Mia, Kyle, and Ryan, armed with night vision cameras, EMF meters, and enough bravado to cover their fear. They called it the Blink Project. It was supposed to be a stunt, entertainment, fake screams, cheap thrills. It became something else entirely. The first hour of the stream was typical nervous laughter, sarcastic commentary, flickering lights, thousands tuned in, chat flooded with ghost emojis and dares. But by hour 3, the tone had changed. The house was quiet, too quiet. Even the floorboards didn't creak. Mia whispered that the shadows moved on their own. Kyle claimed the temperature dropped 20 degrees in one room, even though there was no draft. By hour 6, the cameras caught something no one could explain. Ryan walked past a mirror, but his reflection didn't follow. It stayed, smiling. The audience lost their minds. Screenshots spread across message boards. Comments exploded. Then, silence. The feed froze, then glitched, then came back. But it wasn't the same. The angles had changed. The cameras now faced the crew from high above, like they were being watched. Mia began crying. She said she couldn't feel her hands. Kyle stood in a corner, head tilted, muttering, "It's learning my name." Derek tried to leave, but the front door was gone. Not locked, not gone. Would where there had been space. Then came the static. An hour of static. Then the eye. A single, glowing eye appeared on screen. Pale blue. Bloodless. Blinking slowly. The chat froze. Viewers reported crashing systems, flickering lights, and in one case nosebleeds. Then the stream ended. No outro. No goodbye. Just darkness. The next morning, their van was found near the property, empty. Inside, 4 cell phones sat on the passenger seat, all still recording. Each file was corrupted, except one. In it, Derek's voice could be heard, shaking. If you're watching this, don't blink. Don't even blink. The rest was static. Their channel was deleted within hours, and nobody ever saw the Fearcast team again. The Forgotten Tapes. In 2014, a repossessed storage unit in Ithaca, New York was auctioned off to the public. Mostly junk, old furniture, torn books, water-damaged boxes. But near the back was a milk crate filled with VHS tapes. Each tape been labeled, save for one, written in red marker across its spine. Forgive me, the buyer brought it home out of curiosity. He still had a working VCR. The tape started with static, then a date stamp, March 3rd, 1999. A man appears on screen. Mid-30s.com. Eyes sunken. His voice trembles as he speaks. This is for whoever finds it. I tried to leave. I tried to forget. It wouldn't let me. Behind him is a wall of photographs. Black and white Polaroids, each showing a person staring directly into the lens. Some smiling, some crying, some expressionless. Each photo is pinned to the wall with a rusty nail. The man, he never says his name, explains that he once lived in Windermere, that he snuck into the house on a dare when he was 16, that something inside followed him out. He says it doesn't live in the house. The house is just the skin. The thing inside. It remembers. It knows how to follow silence. He says he hasn't slept in 7 years. At the 40-minute mark, he points the camera at a mirror. There's no reflection. Not of him. Not of the room. Just darkness. He whispers it took my name first. Then it started erasing other people's. I think it feeds on memory, on existence. As he continues speaking, the tape distorts. His face flickers, becomes multiple versions of itself, smiling, crying, screaming all at once. The final minute is the man sobbing, curled up on the floor, chanting, "Not my face, not my face. Not my face." And the tape ends. The buyer who watched the tape never returned to the storage facility. Neighbors say they began seeing a light on in his attic flickering like candlelight. Police later found the house empty, except for a single wall covered in Polaroids. All of them of the buyer, each with a different expression. Each taken from an angle he never could have reached alone. The house that waits. There's something different about the land where the house stands. Even the soil feels raw to soft, like it's breathing underneath you. To silent, like it's listening. Locals say you can't find the house if you're looking for it. You have to forget something important first. A birthday, a name, a face you loved once. Only then will the trees part. Only then will it let you see, over the years, Hikers had stumbled across it, thinking it was abandoned. Curious teenagers, lost campers, runaways. Each story ends the same way. They're found weeks later, wandering back into town barefoot, wild-eyed, muttering nonsense or not at all. Some are catatonic, some are laughing. All of them speak of rooms that breathe, of eyes on the ceiling, and of walls that whisper the names you never told anyone. And always, they mention the same thing, the tower. They say it wasn't built like the rest of the house. It's older, hungrier, like it was buried deep, and the house was built around it. One man drew it in charcoal while in a mental war. A spire of bone and teeth, not wood and stone. The drawing had no windows, only pupils. He died that night. Massive cerebral hemorrhage. His last words were, "It finally blinked." No one has successfully mapped the interior of the house. Floor plans change, always loop, doors vanish and reappear. And the tower is different for everyone who enters it. To one person, it's filled with mirrors. To another, it's filled with voices. To a third, it's filled with people they thought were long dead. But there is one common detail. In the very center of the top floor, no matter the dream or delusion, is a chair. And when you sit in it, the house sits in you. You stop being watched. You become the watcher. And after that, you never blink the same way again. The living structure. You can take pictures of the house, but they won't stay the same. Photographs warp, lines curve, angles twist, and always something in the background looks like it's watching. Architects who study the house don't last long, not professionally, not mentally. One described it as spatial schizophrenia. Another called it a nervous system made of wood. But a structural engineer named Vincent Klein took it further. He ran heat maps, scans, 3D modeling, and what he found changed everything. The walls pulse faintly, like veins. The stairs shift pitches every 2 hours. Like breathing, the center of the house radiates energy, not electric, not magnetic, emotional. Fear. Specifically, it measures as a frequency, a vibration that spikes when someone is inside. Klein's theory, the house is alive, not metaphorically, not spiritually, biologically. He published his findings. He disappeared 2 weeks later. His wife found a note. It simply read, "I was the muscle, the house is the brain." Since then, conspiracy boards have referred to the house as a living structure, a vessel designed to interface with thought, with memory, with identity. People don't just get lost inside, they get rewritten. You don't come out of the house changed. You come out as what the house wants you to be. There is no proof. There never will be. Because the moment you try to explain it, your words rearrange themselves. Just like the runes. And just like the people who still think they've never been there. Until they look in the mirror and see something blink that isn't them. If you know, it knows. Some stories sleep. This one doesn't. This one listens, it waits. It spreads like a name you forgot, but your mouth still remembers how to say. People who hear about the house begin to change. They wake up at odd hours. They forget simple words. They look in the mirror and feel, watch, and then they see it. Not the house itself. Not at first. They see signs. A staircase they don't remember walking up. A hallway in their home that feels a little longer than it used to. A window that never faced north now does. That's how it begins. The house doesn't need you to visit. Once you've heard about it, once you've imagined it, it finds a door inside you. Some say it's a curse, others a contagion. But those who know the truth, they say it's an invitation. Because the house doesn't want to be alone. It needs someone to see it, to remember it, to believe in it just long enough that when it blinks, it sees you back. And when that happens, you'll feel a shift in your house, in your dreams, in your skin. You'll feel a heartbeat in your walls. And that's when you'll know you don't live in your home anymore. It lives in you. You've read this far. You know its name. And now, it knows yours. Dark Knight Chronicles TV, uncovering the terror that hides in plain sight.